I am looking at statistics around sales calls. And as you'd suspect, it reflects a world where the power to close a deal has more to do with the prospective buyer than it has to do with the sales rep's ability. With technology at their fingertips, buyers are more informed than ever. And in all likelihood, a prospect has narrowed their choices to 2 to 3 select vendors before making contact. Have a listen to some of these statistics. Today, there is an average of 7 decision makers involved in the B2B buying process, and 50 to 90% of the journey is complete before a buyer interacts with a sales rep. Only 2% of cold calls result in an appointment. 74% of companies don't leave voicemails. In 2007, it took 3.68 cold calls attempts. In 2007, it took 3.68 cold call attempts to reach a prospect. Today, it takes 8 or more. More than 40% of salespeople say prospecting is the most challenging part of the sales process, followed by closing, 36%, and qualifying, 22%. 8 in 10 prospects prefer talking to reps over email, which matches up with the percentage of reps who use it. Which is why I'm talking to someone in a bit who has been involved with thousands of sales calls, over 15 years of sales coaching, and built over 200 funnels. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest today is Jeremy Pope. Jeremy, you're a former clinical and stage hypnotist who now helps entrepreneurs build scalable, high-ticket sales departments. You've been a top salesperson, sales manager, sales trainer for international businesses, including the direct marketing giant Duffy Renker. Now you and your team help build high-ticket sales departments and help smaller business owners repair broken sales methods. I believe you've sold something like 1.7 million per month in revenue as a sales manager of a team.
We've already talked anymore.
And you're the client success director for traffic and funnels. And of course, we've talked a bit about your experience with sales calls and funnels, but you describe yourself as an overhauler. I'm curious, what do you mean?
The overhaulic is more of a play on words than anything. Just I'm addicted to overhauling sales processes and sales calls and the toxic business practices that accidentally make their way in just because we don't know any better. I have a bit of an addiction to fixing that stuff. That's a lot of fun. And yeah, that's, I guess, what it means. Hi, I'm Jeremy, and I'm an overhaulic.
So, Jeremy, would you say that's like your personal area of strength, or is your personal area of strength something else altogether?
That's an interesting question. I don't get asked that very often, but I've asked it of myself many times. Sales is not my strength. I am a pretty good salesperson, and I usually rise to the top very quickly due to good systems. But putting systems in place and understanding the psychology of a system, of a process, of how tech needs to support everything else, how a process needs to support, how we can let a process do the emotional heavy lifting, that I think that's more my strength than just sales. So I've been very blessed that I can spot weird stuff going on due to that systems thinking.
And in that area of strength, what would you say something that businesses don't know but should?
There are far too many to even remember, much less recount. One of the things that business owners need to understand, most of my clients are very small businesses. Like most of them they're hiring their first sales team, or they've churned 3 or 4 times and they're hiring their first successful sales team with me. And it's a tricky spot because they haven't yet learned what confidences the sales team needs to have in order to succeed. And so I talk about stopping accidentally abusing your new salespeople by refusing to give them confidence. So they need confidence in the offer. They need confidence in the client results. They need confidence in the pricing. They need confidence in you as a CEO or as a sales manager, if you've had a sales team churn and you're already a manager under someone else, and they need confidence in 2 or 3 other things. But a big part of it, I guess you could sum it up in, they need confidence in their authority and their ability to make a deal. They need to know what kind of deal they're authorized and able to make without putting their foot in it. And those are not necessarily tricky things to build, but they're not easy at the same time. Simple can be difficult. And so when someone has had a lot of make it up as you go magic happening, a friend of mine, Josh Elledge, calls it founder magic. I say founders make dirty deals, or founder fuel runs dirty. When the founder is on sales, we do whatever we want. We sell whatever we want, and we let our team put up with it. That they'll put up with it because we're paying them. But when a salesperson comes along, all that changes. And so they have to have absolute clarity on where their boundaries are. And they have to have clarity on, is this what has been sold before? And I see far too many micro founders, especially in the service space. I see far too many of them. They'll hire a commission sales team even and expect VP sales level thinking and activity from them. And it's just abuse. It's abuse, but plain and simple. If you want a partner in the business, give equity and make sure that the business can pay this person's bills. There are a lot of people that try and hire before they're ready. And so I view it as part of my mission to shut that down and get people ready to hire, but certainly don't hire before they're ready.
It's interesting listening to what you were saying, because most of it would seem like common sense, but at the core of it, at least from my perspective, it sounds as though culture is probably something that is being overlooked and yet is so crucial to provide the confidences that you were speaking about.
I'm really glad you said that about the common sense, because I believe 2 things about common sense. One is that Mahan Khalsa talks about the curse of knowledge in his book, Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And the expert has the curse of knowledge. I was trained as an EMT and then trained as a paramedic, and I never really worked in the field, partly because I'm terrible at testing and I was miserable in that field. But I saw, I don't know, dozens of firefighters be really annoyed at people for not knowing insider knowledge, like what sugar does to their body or things like that. It's like, okay, you had literal training on this. You paid money to go to school for this knowledge, and you expect the layman to understand it. So being able to separate things that are common knowledge in the industry from common sense, that's a really important part of my mission. And understanding that most entrepreneurs, no, all entrepreneurs and all leaders are self-taught to a majority degree. It's very unusual to find someone that has had an apprentice style education that leads them through the stages of maturity in a very predictable way. That's an unusual thing there. MBAs do not fix that issue. And so if you can find a mentor, do, for one thing. Anyone listening who is a beginning sales leader, if you can find a mentor, absolutely do. Don't ask them to be a mentor. Just start asking them questions now and then. Ease into it. Don't give them the heavy lift. But also, when you don't have that, who knows what you know and what you don't know? Donald Rumsfeld talks about the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns as 4 stages of knowledge there. And he got a lot of flack many years ago for talking about that from stupid journalists who did not understand the concept, and they just thought, funny word. But the unknown unknowns will kill you. The things you don't know that you don't know are just absolutely killer. And so when we come in as a coach and we say, okay, there are a few things that neither of us know if these are known yet. Let's find out. So I've got my checklists. I've got my, okay, here's the framework. That's the benefit of having systems available, is you don't have to remember everything. So that's part one, is let's separate common knowledge from common industry knowledge from common sense, like things that can be intuited reliably. And then the other piece is I'm very proud to use a lot of things that are common sense. And the devil is in the details, as always. So we can intuit the high level principles, but how does that play out in everyday life? And that's where the culture comes in that you were talking about. When we have written culture, I do not exaggerate when I say written. I have 3-4 pages on my website at salescalloverhaul.com/culture is our public facing culture. And I update that about every 6 months with the help of my team, with suggestions from them, because when they suggest, they have buy-in. When I am dictating, that's hard to build buy-in around. And so the cultural stuff, does it tie in with the vision for the company? Does everyone, Pat Lencioni talks about the 3 signs of a miserable job being immeasurability, immatterability, and anonymity. And so do you feel known, especially by your manager as a person? Do you feel like your work matters? Do you have a daily representation of how much your work matters and to whom and why it matters? And then can you measure if you're doing a good job without relying on, oh, my boss had sugar today and he's in a bad mood, or maybe it's me. That's an unhealthy work environment, right? So having the I matter, here's why, here's how I can tell, and here's who knows me and I feel known and I know them, and et cetera. That's a big deal for the culture. But then tying that all into vision, that's part of that matterability. And people have to be able to get there on their own reliably after onboarding. You have to drill that in so hard during onboarding that people can get back there anytime they need that reminder, that emotional leverage on themselves or on the problem or the grit that you need for real problem solving. That culture, you've nailed it. That is absolutely vital. Peter Drucker, one of the first strategy consultants that we know about, he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it's absolutely true. A healthy culture create good strategy, but not necessarily the other way around.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And I love the fact that you talk about having it written down and available to not just the organization, but as you do, to everyone that would potentially work with you as well. So that creates, I guess, a beginning level of synergy with conversations that you have both internally and
it can. If someone once you have buy-in on that, then you can have that synergy at the beginning of the conversation. You don't have to rebuild it every time.
I remember when we were talking earlier, you were talking about the fact that quite often you run across sales folk who believe that they need to be someone else when selling. And I'm curious, is that, I guess, learned behavior from past experiences, or is that almost like a expected kind of behavior, simply because they're in a different situation, dealing with different kinds of people that they're used to, and therefore feel that they need to put on this facade, if I could put it that way?
You certainly can. Yes. I think it's a function of post-traumatic sales disorder.
Okay.
It's very much a learned behavior. And this may be from childhood. It may not be from a sales situation. Unresolved issues from childhood. You mentioned before, I came from the clinical hypnosis world. And so I got to see an awful lot of that stuff and how it plays out at age 45, at age 72. It doesn't matter. If you don't deal with it, time does not heal all wounds. It heals some wounds. And dealing effectively with root causes is a very big deal. A lot of founders give themselves a gradual PTSD through failure without redemption, I guess you could say. And that's something that I had to struggle with myself. But the average age of the founder when they launch their first successful business is 42. At least in the US it is. I don't know statistics for other countries, but like, how many times have you failed before then? How many times do you have to get back up before that happens? How many times do you have to gut it out before that if you are average? And of course, there's no average person. That's an aggregate. That's the point. But boy, the classic story of Colonel Harlan Sanders of Kentucky Fried Chicken, he was in his 60s or 70s before I'm not the world's best storyteller. I can't even remember the age of the main character, but he was pretty old by the time he finally made it work. And grit is necessary. The resilience is necessary, but healing is necessary as well. And you have to, there are a lot of things that kind of end up being like physical therapy or physical rehab, things like that.
So in a sales situation, it is, as you're trying to help perhaps a team where you've got a few individuals who think along similar lines, is this an extended, almost therapy-like sessions that you need to conduct, or is there another way of helping them make that heart shift and mind shift in their thinking?
It's not extended, no. We have a package called an Overhaul package, and it's the same name as the brand itself, the sales call Overhaul. And what we do with that is we have a sure thing, no bets guarantee, where if someone can't raise their close rate by 25% within three call reviews by following our instructions, we will send them and their spouse to Vegas from anywhere in the continental US on our dime for 2 days. We're very confident in that. And it's because people when they come in for sales help, they're not coming in for tweaks. They're coming in for fundamentals. Kind of like the Bruce Lee quote, I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 different kicks. I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. Become expert in the fundamentals. And so helping people become expert enough in the fundamentals. I deal with a lot of founder sales. And so they don't have to get to a 10 out of 10. That's not necessary. Get to a 7. Come on, just get to where everything can work, and you can put your attention on the highest leverage things. And maybe that's stick with sales, and maybe that's something else, but get it just basically working. And then you get a little breathing room, and you can be strategic again with that. So these are not extended things. In our package, we've got 3 call reviews that are line by line, like listening to the call recordings, looking at the transcript, going through everything. And we'll give maybe 40 or 50 different items that we've noticed as sales coaches. But then we go back up. Okay, here are the 3 high leverage things. Do these on your next call you send in. And then we've got 2, and it only needs 2. Okay, I've done 3 a couple times with the belief buster sessions, the mindset coaching sessions. If somebody is having trouble doing what they know to do, okay, let's deal with the beliefs that are forming the identity around that. Let's deal with the beliefs that are changing the behavior or even setting up the environment incorrectly for success. And let's make sure that we deal with it as expanded as we need to. Nothing is off the table when you're problem solving. The nuclear option never goes away. You know, that if you're unwilling to explore every corner of your options, if you're unwilling to have a nuclear option, then it constrains you and it sets you up for abuse, self-abuse and abuse by others. And it sets you up to abuse others as well. It's just a bad situation when you refuse to consider all the options and will I, won't I? Like, some options are not really worth considering for long, but they have to be on the table for at least a moment so that you can play with it. And so I find as long as we explore fully, it does not take extended therapy sessions or anything like that. It's all right, let's do some NLP techniques here to deal with these beliefs. Let's get through quickly and let's move on to something else. Let's move the constraint to a different part of the business. I'm a big fan of theory of constraints.
It's interesting, your approach there, because I was looking at your website where I believe you talk a lot about giving. Now, for at least some cases, I would say they tend to be natural givers, but often get stuck.
A lot of my clients are, yeah.
But often get stuck in a kind of taker kind of process where it's all about the sale, the numbers, etc. I'm assuming you help such individuals. What can they do about the process other than perhaps finding a better environment where it tends to favor them and how they're wired?
Yeah. Control over your environment is that nuclear option that I was talking about there. If you can't get into a place that will let you be healthy in your current position, quit today or put in your notice today.
Yeah.
Your growth, your health, your maturity is more important than cash dollars. And it will make a bigger difference in your cash dollars than anything else you could do. If you care about your maturity at all, then make sure that you have leverage on that. Make sure you can get leverage on building maturity. So yeah, givers stuck in a taker process is one of my favorite things to talk about. Thank you for bringing that up. And when you have, there's so many different ways we could go with this. I can share a technique that demonstrates a lot of things. Why don't we go that direction?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. I often do this as a role play. You can tell when a role play is starting with a sales trainer because they'll use your first name really aggressively. Are you ready? All right.
Yep.
Vinay, I am not the world's smoothest salesperson. Thank you for getting on this call with me and to hear about what we're doing and to see if we can help. I'm feeling weird about money right now. Do you mind if I just tell you what the price is up front, and then we can spend the next 30 or 40 minutes figuring out if the value's there, if there's a fit here, and if we really can solve your problem and actually collaborate on that? Is that okay with you?
Sure.
All right. The price is $18K. All right. Now I can relax. Do you need to scream or anything? Do you need to mute yourself and curse me out or anything? So is that in range? If we can solve your problem, if there's value there for you, if this is a fit psychologically, the way we operate, is that even in range?
It could be potentially. Yeah.
There you go. And that's the whole technique. That's what I call the price up front technique.
Right.
And that's a version of my elephant in the room thinking or process. And I got vaguely this from anybody who studied Sandler deeply will recognize significant hints of that in this process. And so the price up front technique does several things. One, I do this probably in 2/3 of my sales calls, and that is a real price currently for one of our packages. So I'm very open about pricing, which is unusual in many arenas, but especially in the arena of B2B sales when the vendor is having a little trouble scaling. And it really makes you stand out from the desperate folks. It puts you in mind to qualify, for one thing. You get into the ABQ, the always be qualifying mindset and mantra rather than the always be closing mantra. And it's much healthier for you and for your prospects and for your delivery team and for everything in the company.
Sure.
If you are qualifying and disqualifying continually and you're weighing that, then you're going to make much cleaner deals as a salesperson, as a founder, as a whatever you are. But so am I pushing, or can I build appropriate tension in this? Is one of the shifts that makes in your mind. So you move yourself to that qualifying mindset. 2, you move both of you to a collaborative and transparent mindset. So at minute 4 of your call, let's say, it comes up, you're feeling weird about something. Maybe it's delivery times compared to your competitors. Maybe it's your price. Maybe just whatever is making you feel weird. You can bring it up with this X upfront technique, the price upfront technique, the delivery upfront technique, whatever you want to call it. But elephant in the room is there's something on my mind. I'm going to address this immediately. And I'm not going to give them any hint that I'm going to try and gloss over it, that I'm going to try and manipulate them into not remembering to ask about it before I ask for the sale. And they can trust me when I bring up something. Is there such a thing as a real prospect that doesn't care about price? Not with non-impulse buys. If you're in a luxury market and you've got someone who has more money than Midas, and this is an impulse buy, that's a different story. Impulse buys are not what we're talking about here. We're talking about significant decisions that are significant to the buyer. So there's no such thing as a buyer with a significant decision that doesn't care about price. It's in their top three. It's going to be in their top three things that they care about with this item, with this call, with this process. So how dare we try and do anything sneaky with something we know our buyer cares about? How dare we? That is essence of manipulation, essence of pressure. And to throw it into stark relief, I use the phrase consent and sales rape. And that's very strong language, but every romantic relationship, every sexual relationship needs sexual tension in order to be healthy. The flow, the ebb and flow of leadership and the teasing each other and all that kind of stuff, it has to happen. But when you add pressure to a sexual relationship, we have words for those people: molester, abuser, rapist, all those kinds of things. And it's the same mindset applied to a different topic. And so if we believe that this is a significant decision in their lives, maybe it's not as significant as will you have sex with me or something like that. But if it's significant, then we have a responsibility to treat it like it's significant. And we have a responsibility to be kind around that. And we have a responsibility to provide good, healthy leadership around this thing. So this technique all by itself can help remind you as a salesperson to get in a healthy mindset and to be transparent. And it reminds them, or it shows your prospect for the first time, oh, this is a very different kind of conversation than I've had in the last couple of months, or maybe the last couple of years. And now you've got 40 minutes to pull together against the problem instead of ambushing them with the price at the end, or ambushing them with, can I send a proposal? Can I send a proposal? How about a proposal at the end, depending on what your sales cycle is like. But the high pressure stuff is a great way to get ghosted on your second call. Zero pressure selling, you're building buy-in step by step by step. And it lets people stick with you. It lets people stick with you. You want to telegraph your moves. When you have a partner, you want them to know what you're doing. So I think that there's more I could say about the price upfront technique and what it accomplishes. But hey, listener, you play with it. You see what else it accomplishes for you. And let me know. I'm always interested in how other people describe this stuff.
I'm curious with this price upfront technique. I love the fact that you're doing it, and I think that's a key part of being transparent and building trust, which I'd love to dive into a bit deeper if we can. But I'm curious, especially with high ticket items, doesn't there need to be a conversation around establishing a bit of understand on the part of the potential customer as to why your price is what it is and how that differentiates from the rest of the competition? Because the person could be sitting there going, that's a lot, and maybe I should listen to this guy, but how do I compare apples with apples? Which is probably running around in the back of their head.
Yeah. So price is running around in people's heads regardless of whether you talk about it or not. You're not going to eliminate that. I would rather know as soon as possible whether the loop is open or closed than not know the answer. Data is important, and calibration to the person in front of you is very important in any kind of persuasive situation. Do I have buy-in? Do I have buy-in? Do I have buy-in? Why would I wait to find out if I've got buy-in until minute 42? That's pretty silly in my opinion. And there are plenty of ways to find that out. This is not the only technique that you can use to do that. But any good salesperson they know they need to know, and they know whether they have buy-in. Statistically, this is one of the biggest things that you build as a salesperson is, do I have buy-in? Do I have buy-in? Everybody's going to describe that differently. That's just my version of how I talk about it. But is there commitment here? Are we on the same page? Are we both committed to this action, this process, this idea, this? It's not the same thing as rapport. And that's what a lot of newer salespeople get confused about. That's just, are we in sync as people? But are we in rapport around this idea? That might be a useful way to think about it. So when you have the ability to calibrate that buy-in, it changes a lot. 2, I've gotten 2 commitments from this person in that price upfront technique. 1, will you stick with me if I tell you the price? Yes. You never get a no to that one.
Yep.
That's not a micro commitment. That's a commitment right there. It's not a sale, but it's a commitment. Then, is that even in range? You're going to get one of 3 answers: no, maybe, or yes. And you gave me a yeah, maybe answer a couple minutes ago there. And that tells me where I am. It tells me how much buy-in I have. That could be in range. Okay. So what that tells me when somebody says that kind of thing is, I'm about halfway closed right now if I just make sure that they understand the value here later on, and they understand the problem we're solving, the vision we're accomplishing, and I reduce the fear of risk. It's my opinion that there's only 2 things you can do on a sales call. You build desire and you reduce risk. That's it. That's the only point that's the only way to get action on any, not just a sales call.
Sure.
And as long as you have the opportunity to do that, you can do it with a closed loop instead of an open loop. Or you can do it with a mostly closed loop instead of a wide open, what's it going to be, what's it going to be, what's it going to be thinking that's using up, let's say 15% of their brain power instead of let's focus together, right? As an ADHD sufferer, and I do mean sufferer, I am not playing games with that. I value every percent of my brain power to a perhaps inordinate degree. I'm a smart guy, but I am not a particularly effective guy when I don't have my systems laid out on paper, when I don't have the task management system, when I don't set 9 alarms. I do everything I can to close loops in my own mind. So this is very much a mess into message thing. Steve Krug, a web design trainer, he has a book called Don't Make Me Think, and it's a dynamite bestseller book. And giving people more than 3 options is a deal killer very consistently. Not always, but statistically, you don't want to give more than 3 options. You want to give enough where you can do some price anchoring, and you don't want to give so much that you start affecting their executive functioning. So why would I do that on a timer? Why would I do anything that affects their executive functioning in a negative way when I've got 45 minutes to talk to this person, when I've got 20 minutes for an intro, and then I've got the possibility of a 40-minute demo later on for my software or my service or my proposal that I'm going to show them or whatever it is? We can shorten these sales cycles very significantly. And we can shorten a sales cycle from 6 months to 2 months or to 6 weeks a lot of times, just by making sure that we're building buy-in correctly. Correctly is a strong word. Effectively is a better word. There's a lot of ways to do it. I'm not a one-way kind of guy. So when I'm not ignoring your question about the don't you need to build value, but do you need to build value first? No. Absolutely not. You need to build commitment, and building value is one way to build commitment. You can do that first. I have nothing against it. But when you think building value is the only way, that leads to high pressure. I can't let go of the price. I can't let go of the price. I can't tell them the price until they're in an emotionally vulnerable state. I can't let go of the price until they're in such deep pain that they'll say yes to anything. I can't let them have that price until they're in no state to make a healthy decision because I've got them so worked up. And I want people to be as committed as possible by the time I talk to them. I want people to understand my value as much as possible. I like being valued. I like my
Mm.
stuff being valued. There's nothing wrong with it. So you build that as much as you can, but you certainly don't become desperate around that. If you feel uncomfortable, first of all, say something. You can say it right on your sales call. It's a very effective technique. Oh man, I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself right now. Are you okay? I might be putting pressure on you too. Are you okay over there? So that's a Sandler technique as well. But when you have pressure in a situation, it puts you in some really weird mental spaces. And both of you coming from an alpha position, as it were, there's nothing wrong with letting other people be the alpha as well. Like you don't have to have a top dog, underdog thing going on in this. You can be partners in this setup. So I would say commitment, not value. That's what I focus on. And value is one way to do that.
Right. So you talked about putting price up front to gain buy-in. In today's world, however, most of us find ourselves in virtual environments when we were on a sales
I do
call.
all my selling over Zoom.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Building trust is important.
Yeah.
Putting that price up front is a great way to kick things off and get initial buy-in. But I'm curious, when you're looking at high ticket sales, could you talk us through what the funnel looks like? Do you have a framework that you use, recommended that the salespeople use? What is your approach to ensuring that
I really don't. I can recommend funnels. I've built hundreds and helped build hundreds more, but I've seen enough that I no longer can say, here is the way. There are some ways that are working better in 2023 than other ways. And there's some ways that worked great in 2017 that hardly work at all anymore. Like they don't work at a cost-effective marketing spend anymore. So paying attention to the landscape is a big deal, but paying attention. So I can say here some of the factors that I look at when I'm deciding what funnel ought to be in place, or when I'm deciding what tweaks need to happen to make the funnel effective. What are the competitors doing? Let's do something different, unless it's just working great. And if we are just one of the crowd, everything's fine. That happens sometimes. So if there's no need to innovate, don't spend your energy. Go do something useful. Go do something higher leverage if you don't have to innovate. Marketing is one of the places where being different and standing out is more important than most other areas of business. It's one of the places where very frequently the conventional wisdom will get you to the bottom quarter of the pack. If you don't apply the conventional wisdom really well, you'll sink to the bottom pretty quickly. So being different is often a faster way to move the needle than trying to execute better than everyone else who has more practice than you do on that's already happening. So we'll look at the competitive landscape. Understanding the avatar and the stages of market awareness. Beata Chalet with her airtightavatar.com is dynamite. If you haven't interviewed her, I would be happy to make an intro because I am so impressed with her. She's in a more like a solopreneur space than B2B, but you might have fun talking with her anyway. So there is understand the unsexy spade work, the ditch digging of the foundations of your marketing and sales is understanding your avatar. What does this ideal client, not just any client, but the ideal client, what do they truly want? Do I understand what they want, but beyond, well beyond more time, more money, more freedom? That's lazy. You could say that about every single person in the world, more time, more money, more free. Who does that not apply to? It doesn't tell us anything useful. So how does this person want those three things? What do those three things get them? How does that manifest in their business? How does it manifest in their personal life? There are a lot of places that you need to go to understand that avatar. And I know a dozen people who have great avatar frameworks. And then understanding the stages of market awareness. My friend Jonathan Peck new friend, I should say. I don't want to overstate the case there, but he showed me his way of setting up ChatGPT. He's a brilliant copywriter, and he can write 3 months worth of content and funnel strategy and the funnels for launches and everything in about 72 hours now, because he has such insanely clear and connected frameworks for the stages of market awareness. He breaks it down 3 levels deep, not just the unaware, problem aware, solution aware, product aware things. He goes 3 more layers beyond that with the way he does it. So again, the devil is in the details. Understanding your avatar in their market awareness, understanding the persona that you're talking to here, their core needs, the things that really drive them, a need for significance, the psychographics there. It's not just about the business needs in B2B. It's about the person you're selling to in B2B. And that often gets overlooked. So by going more personal, by going less respectful when you're selling into the C-level, you stand out more. Just anything different. So the funnel design has to be different. My top strength in the Strengths Finder test, which I recommend highly, is individualization. You're not going to get a straight answer out of me on what's the best funnel. I don't believe there is one. I believe that every product has to be compared with the market, with the persona, and with the company providing that product. You have to understand the entire landscape to understand what kind of funnel needs to happen. There are lots of good ones, though.
Right. So with this idea of funnels, though, obviously in the B2B space, there are a few decision makers.
Yes.
I think it's the fact that early on that there's about 7 in most cases.
That's common.
How do we ensure that we're speaking to all those decision makers as opposed to just the one who may be initiating contact with a company?
So when I'm doing enterprise sales with any kind of a committee, like selling into a committee or effectively selling into a committee, whether or not it's a formal committee, I care about a few things. One is, who is my champion and what are the other relationships involved? And then sometimes I rate the strength of the champion, although you have to be careful not to put too much stock in your numbers. These are guesses, as any prediction is, but I will rate the champion's strength. How close are they? Is there one decision maker that we can get to? And it's like we have 7 contacts with various people and there ends up being one person who will do it or not do it? Or is this a very consensus-based decision maker? In the US, Erin Meyer, in her book Culture Map, which I highly recommend, she compares country cultures on bell curves on 8 different spectrums. And one of those spectrums is egalitarianism. And for instance, the Dutch culture is far more egalitarian than the US culture. US culture, we like to think of ourselves as very liberty-oriented, very individualistic, very decentralized and consensus-based. We're on that end of the spectrum, according to her, but we're not close to the end. We're much closer to the middle. And so there are strong decision makers that we can find in the US culture, for instance. I don't remember the UK culture, so I can't speak to that one. I just remember a couple of examples on a few of these spectrums whenever I talk about it. But fascinating book and fascinating way of thinking about this stuff. But so sometimes you're going up a chain or you're going through a chain. It might not be up, it might be lateral, to find the decision maker, and they need a little input from the people you've talked to. But you may have to start from scratch every single time you talk to someone. When you're selling into something with a strong decision maker, it makes it simpler. Find out who they are and then get there. And there are a lot of ways to do that, but that's your key when there's one decision maker. So grading those relationships is one big thing that I do. And then in a company where the leader is I've found this commonly when you're going up, say in a product organization, you're going up from a VP product or a head of product for a product owner for a certain product. Let's say it's a big product. and then you go to the VP product, and then you go up to the CTO or the chief product officer or somebody like that. So you might need to go 3 or 4 levels into that. If that C-level person is very coaching oriented, if they are very leadership development oriented, then they tend to be very consensus focused,
Right.
and they let their people make the decision. So you'll see them in these meetings, they'll have to sit back and watch, and you can sometimes even see them grinning as their people bring up something like, I'm proud of you, girl, or that's my boy, because they knew that topic needed to come up, but they were waiting for their VP to bring it up, or things like this. So some of it depends on how mature the leader is around leadership itself and development itself. But making sure that it's easier when you have multiple people on the call, because all you have to do is literally watch their faces right there. So watching the body language and, okay, who do I have buy-in from and who do I not have buy-in from? I'm talking to you. The person that I don't have buy-in from, if the leader is bringing them in, there's a reason that leader is bringing them in. Specifically, when the leader says, let's talk to my people, like that kind of situation, that's going to be a consensus decision there. They're going to go away after we're done and talk about this amongst themselves. So set them up for success. And you address the person with the least buy-in on that call. That's where you want to hang out, right there. Is the person who's going to be your biggest blocker, hang out with them and get their questions answered. And give everybody enough attention that no one feels slighted. But that's pretty easy to do. You've got their faces within 6 inches of each other on Zoom. So just be scanning, maintain situational awareness. I don't know. These are really long. These are hard questions to answer. I appreciate you letting me ramble, but I'm not sure I've answered the question. Did I?
You certainly have, but
Okay.
I guess one of the things that I'm aware of is the fact that if you're looking to leverage your champion through this entire sales process, one of the key issues is the retellability of your message and ensuring that it is actually retellable, because often you might get someone who goes, great, this sounds great, but is virtually able to explain it to someone else, and often asks for a lot of material and things which doesn't really help the cause, so to speak.
Thank you for bringing me back to that. Yeah.
I'd love to get your thoughts on how do you ensure you have this retellability factor?
Yeah. As long as your champion is strong enough through whatever grading mechanism you prefer to use, then there's one other thing I do before I focus on retellability. And that is, I will literally ask, okay, where are we, John? Because I want to make sure that I am giving you the help that you need to make the decision that you are making, not the one I think you're making. So are we in a situation where you're sold and you don't know how to talk to Anna, or are you unsold? Because I'm going to do very different things based on that. If you're sold, then I'm going to feel very pushy. If I think you're sold when you're not, I'm going to feel very pushy in my help. But if you're not sold, then let's just hang out there for a little bit. So that structure allows me to get real transparency around, okay, where are we in this process right now? Do I need to follow up 3 more times with this champion before they're even sold? Are they even a champion right now? So I make sure they really are a champion. I never assume that I have a champion. I get it pretty explicit about, is this person going to be a champion? And I help them self-assess the relationship that they've got. And then we talk about, what do you need? How good of a salesperson are you? Is there really a problem here? Does Anna feel like there's a problem here? Is this a visible problem to her, or is this a visible problem to you? And you're going to have to convince her. So again, it's that individualization that comes in. So I'm not assuming that there's one message that John is going to be able to deliver effectively to Anna every single time. All the Johns and Annas will be able to communicate and receive equally. No, that's important. And that's a powerful sales function when you're building out your funnel. And that's part of the coordination with marketing as well, is getting those punchy sound bites and everything. That comes from research. That comes from understanding your avatar very deeply and being able to use their words back to them. In a sales call, you don't have to guess. Sales is easier than marketing, in my opinion. As much as I'd like to say I've got the tough part of the business, I believe that marketing is harder, because with marketing, you're doing a lot more guessing. You're aggregating, you're averaging, things like that. But with sales, you can literally just ask someone, they will tell you their words. They don't have any others. Use those back to them and you're good. You're in their world when you're using their words. You're in their thoughts. Those are their thoughts. And you don't know what they are, but you're at least using them. So it's the same thing with this. When you know your avatar well enough, when you know Anna as your economic buyer well enough that you know how she talks about the problem, you know when the problem comes up. So is it before a board meeting? Is it before an offsite? Is it before this? Is it just before that? Like, when is she going into pain? What's that cycle like? Understanding her very deeply, and then being able to give John cues and clues on, okay, sometimes the Annas of our world, they are not noticing this stuff unless blah, 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 blah. So again, boy, I have not answered this question. There are a lot of ways to develop punchy marketing and sales messages. I don't have a framework around, like a brandable framework around, here are the 4 steps to developing a punchy sales message. I feel a lot of that stuff out and I plug it into research. I do have processes around this, but I don't have explicit steps. So it's far from an I know it when I see it, but it's, I would literally have to go look through my checklist to see what that is. There are reliable frameworks that you can use, and there are plenty of great people that teach that, but they tend to be more in the marketing world than in the sales world. The elevator pitch type stuff, that's probably not a strength of mine, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I'm sure we could keep going.
Apparently. Sorry.
But I'd love to get your thoughts on what we've talked about. And we've covered a fair bit of ground. But are there perhaps a couple of aspects around this whole idea of overhauling sales processes, sales calls, that you find doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
One of the biggest things that I love when I see other trainers talk about it, Josh Braun is a particular example in the B2B space. If you haven't interviewed him, you should. He's a blast. Is the idea of being a giver in every segment of your sales process and finding ways that your system will support you in being a giver, your process. I don't mean your technology when I say system, I mean your process. So having an aligned process and mindset and mojo and whatever else you want to call it, but all the pieces being in alignment is a very big deal philosophically. It sounds so soft and it sounds so airy-fairy sometimes, but when you can get the vision aligned with the mindset, aligned with the process, aligned with the landscape, we talk about product market fit, and this is very similar, and it plays into product market. It's a big part of getting to where you can see that product market fit. So alignment is a big deal, but you can align around a lot of different things. And I often find myself helping people align around the ability to be a giver in this part of the process. Give first, give often. You can be a matcher when you encounter a taker. You can approach things more like a matcher, the game theory type stuff. But if you start off as a giver and you maintain that giver alignment until someone proves unworthy or that it's harmful to act like a giver in this situation, then do so and make sure that your systems line up. This is one of the reasons that prospecting is so very difficult for people in this world of 8.5 phone calls to get one return or something like that. It's very easy to feel like a taker in the prospecting process. For me, it's extremely easy. to the point where I almost can't do prospecting. I have to go do podcasts instead. So I have to create inbound leads like that. And so keep in mind, like where your own boundaries are, where your own abilities are, where your team's abilities are with this stuff. But when you can find a way to be the giver that you are at every step, you will create some huge differences. Josh Braun doesn't necessarily talk about it in those terms. He talks about great salespeople are not problem solvers, they're problem finders. They find the problem and they surface that problem in the first place that the prospect may not have been aware of. That's a gift. That's a gift right there. So this is a philosophy that kind of pervades every aspect of everything that I talk about. Is how do we be a giver here? How do we be kind here? How do we raise our effectiveness through kindness and using that to stand out? There are a lot of ways. I love gifting campaigns. It's maybe a little on the nose for the topic, but it is a very explicit example of how you can be a giver. If you've got an ARCP of $40,000 a year, then you've got the ability, most likely, to spend $6,000 or $7,000 to acquire that client in the first place. Maybe significantly higher, depending on your churn and all, like your metrics. But if you can spend $6,000 to acquire a client, let's check on the corporate corruption rules so that we're not legit bribing someone. We don't want to run afoul of ethics problems. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can send gifts to sending a 3-gift mystery campaign to the executive's gatekeeper. Send a desk toy with no note. A week later, you send a cool piece of art that you think that gatekeeper might like. There's your champion right there. Your champion is not always who you think it is. And the people that seem the most formidable, the people with the biggest no soliciting signs on their house, they often have those no soliciting signs up because they know they are softies. And if you can find a way past that, you've got a really solid chance of a sale. So co-opting all the right people, that can be done very thoroughly and very easily when you have a giver mentality. It's a huge advantage. So I think that's the core of what I love seeing out there. I'm comfortable saying that's the core. Yeah.
And a great point you make there. Jeremy, this has been terrific. If you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I hardly remember what I said, man. I'm sorry. This was tremendous fun, but I did ramble a lot. I know we covered a lot of ground. I would probably stick with the last bit. When we're looking at sales teams and the systems, like align your systems with giving, and you will find that you can increase your labor pool you can increase the salespeople that you can hire you can double it. Like the number of good salespeople you can have on your team just via the fact that you have a giver strategy and giver processes and giver vision to back that up. You won't have to have the Wolf of Wall Street on your team to make your shitty process work properly. When you have a great process, then lots of people can operate within that. You can have a lot of flexibility. You can go focus on building vision and letting your people grow and flourish in that wonderful system that you've created.
And if listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Go to salescalloverhaul.com/culture. Actually, you know what? Send them straight to the newsletter, the Mental Model Monday newsletter, at salescalloverhaul.com/letter.
Okay, not a problem. We'll include a link to that in the show notes. Jeremy, thanks so much for doing this. It's been a blast.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.